Hello again and happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Welcome back to SFF 180 and this year's edition of the Turkey Day Special. Thomas here, your host as always. Thank you for joining me. Okay, if you've watched my review of Robert Heinlein's 1966 Hugo-winning novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, you will know my opinion of that dubious classic is, well, not exactly reverent. But let me tell you, compared to the book I'm discussing today, Stranger looks like the pinnacle of achievement in the SF field. Now, I understand that if you only go by these two reviews, you might think I'm just a hater, but that really isn't true. Heinlein wrote several books and short stories that I've liked. There's a broad consensus among many fans that early Heinlein is the good stuff and late Heinlein is best avoided, and I won't contradict that in general terms. But even among Heinlein's checkered late career output, The Number of the Beast holds a special place. This novel isn't just bad. It's brain-bendingly awful. I mean, for being the work of one of the genre's grand masters, it reads like a case of literary Dunning-Kruger syndrome by a writer who has no concept of how gloriously he is failing and just fearlessly plows ahead. The parts of the book that want to be funny aren't funny. The parts that want to be sexy are so gross they'd turn Hugh Hefner asexual. And the parts that want to be exciting are just bizarre. I mean, if anyone but Heinlein had written it, this novel would have been rejected outright by any respectable publisher. I mean, the title fits. This book is the Antichrist. The Number of the Beast was published in 1980, and it was Heinlein's first new novel in 7 years, meaning that it was heralded at the time as the year's most eagerly anticipated comeback. I remember the waves of bewilderment and dismay that greeted the book upon its original release. I was a little sprog, just at the age when I was getting started in fandom and going to what few conventions Houston had to offer, and the question on everyone's lips seemed to be, so, have you read Number of the Beast yet? Which they would ask you in the same tone of voice you'd use for something like, hey, did you hear? So-and-so has stage 4 cancer. Seriously, if Twitter or Book Talk or BookTube had existed back then, I can only imagine the rants. Just about the only person I recall praising the book, without reservation, was Analog Magazine's resident critic Spider Robinson, a big influence on me, and a really good reviewer when he wasn't blinded by hero worship, as he was and probably still is in Heinlein's case. Heinlein could produce a novel consisting of 500 pages of nothing but the word tits, and Spider Robinson would hail it as an avant-garde masterwork. So even though by the time I was like 13, 14, I'd read all of Heinlein's juveniles, I'd read Starship Troopers, and I had even challenged myself with Time Enough for Love, I decided to set this one aside for the time being, and I didn't get around to it for several years. I mean, how do you explain such a plotless, utterly incoherent mishmash of scenes that aren't even scenes? How do you explain character development that reads like the product of someone who has never actually interacted with another human being in his life, but has read plenty of pulp magazines and thinks he knows what they sound like? And if it was an intentional callback to pulp stylings, ew. And how do you explain a novel that only resembles a novel in the sense that flinging a pile of manuscript pages into the air and then gathering them up at random might result in something called a novel in some reality? How do you explain this magnificent catastrophe, other than to wonder if Robert Heinlein was simply taking leave of his senses? Reading this book is like listening to a madman on the street corner, who makes perfect sense to himself. So, what's it all about? Well, the first thing Heinlein wants us to know is that he is a huge John Carter of Mars fan, because everyone is named after those characters. We have brilliant mad scientist Jacob Burrows, who's discovered that multiple universes exist along a 6-dimensional non-Newtonian continuum, the total number of which he calculates as 6 to the 6th power to the 6th power. So there's our title. Jacob, who has invented a device capable of exploring these universes, wants to hire Dr. Zebediah John Carter to help him field test it. Zeb is wooed by Jacob's beautiful daughter, Diti, a nickname based on her initials, her full name being Deja Thoris. Zeb and Diti decide to get married immediately after sharing one dance at a party, because that's how Heinlein thinks relationships work. So, are you following, class? Deja Thoris, whose maiden name is Burroughs, marries John Carter. I see what you did there. On-the-nose fan service aside, Zeb, Diti, Jake, and Diti's Aunt Hilda are forced to flee the party after narrowly escaping a car bomb. Taking off in the Gay Deceiver, Zeb's AI-driven car that is almost a spacecraft, the four of them quickly determine that they are being hunted by mysterious alien villains, the Black Hats, possibly from one of these alternate universes, who don't approve of Jake's invention and aren't exactly subtle about expressing said disapproval with weapons. Exactly why they should be so pissed off about all this isn't really explored, but our heroes quickly flee to Jake's ranch, installing the universe-hopping doohickey into Gay Deceiver. Jake and Hilda take a moment to marry each other. Everyone has sex because, it's a Heinlein novel. And then they're off, exploring just in time to avoid the ranch getting nuked by the Black Hats. First off, sweet mother of God, these characters. From what spectacularly bizarre series of lifetime observations did Heinlein get the idea that people, actual Homo sapiens, talk and act in this way? Yes, I understand, in fiction, particularly imaginative fiction, one must allow for creative license, particularly from an author who is known for letting his sense of whimsy run riot in his work. But what it ultimately boils down to is whether or not, even given the context of the story at hand, readers can believe in your characters, find them relatable and sympathetic, let alone realistic. And not only could I find no reason whatsoever to like our quartet of flamboyant, eccentric, time-space-hopping horn dogs all that much, I didn't believe them either. Honestly, if you were in a room with these people just listening to them talk, it would be so awkward and cringe, you would just want to Homer gif back into the bushes. Heinlein's attitudes towards sex in his novels have been greeted with everything from head-scratching puzzlement to outright horror by readers ever since Stranger in a Strange Land. Often, Heinlein treats the subject like an adolescent who has just discovered that porn websites don't actually double-check when you say you're over 18. You can see Heinlein indulging a taste for shocking taboos just for the sake of doing it. Sure, okay, sex is totally great, but there's an approach you can take to such material that's actually maybe kinda hot, but just more mature and adult. And then there's whatever the hell Heinlein is doing, which seems to involve a heavily idealized fixation on hippy-dippy free love fantasies and nudism. Now, some fans defend this stuff by arguing that Heinlein was some kind of progressive early advocate for polyamory. Well, I know a few people who identify as poly, and inasmuch as they've been willing to share, their relationships are just, relationships. It's not like 24-hour wall-to-wall orgies with pool noodles or whatever the fuck. Okay, so live and let live, all right? But why parade all this stuff through the book like it's such a big deal when it is, in fact, irrelevant to your story? It's not just that it's gratuitous, it's goofy. And occasionally more than a little squicky. When Diti, early in the book, states with pure girlish glee that she wouldn't turn down a sexual advance from her own father. Thankfully, there's no follow-up. I'm pretty sure most of you will decide this family of whack jobs ain't nobody you want to be exploring alternate universes with for 500 pages. And what about those 500 pages? Well, what to say other than that they are filled with nothing resembling a coherent narrative? The Black Hats are very quickly forgotten. What little story conflict exists is centered on which of the four gets to be captain of their little crew, followed up by endless bickering that authority isn't properly being respected. Heinlein goes out of his way to refute his critics' charges of sexism here. And if the book has anything that can be called good scenes, they involve Jake being shamed for clinging to outmoded patriarchal ideas and disrespecting Hilda's command, a role for which she is the group's most capable. However, these scenes are all there is, really, in terms of normal drama, and it gets old quickly. The adventure itself first takes us to alternate universes. Of course, they go to an alternate Mars, because the John Carter clan just has to see Barsoom. Mars is home to both Russian and British penal colonies, with the British still entrenched in Victorian Empire culture. Now, a whole exciting adventure story could have come from this, but Heinlein cuts it off at the knees in order to get our heroes exploring further. Eventually, they discover what Jake calls fictons, universes that have been created by works of popular literature and culture. There's even a loud hint that our hero's origin universe is not our universe. Now, this has plenty of good story potential, but Heinlein uses it as not much more than an excuse to go hog wild with endless fan service, name-checking popular SFF worlds created by his colleagues and pals, as well as the stories his generation grew up reading, right? So the gay deceiver goes to Oz, flies over Lilliput, that kind of thing. And there is simply not a whiff of storytelling magic or joy in any of it. Heinlein even works in a snarky reference to his own Stranger in a Strange Land, which comes off as less self-deprecating than self-indulgent. By the final 100 pages, assuming anybody has gotten that far who isn't a masochistic critic or Spider Robinson, everyone's just hanging out naked with some of Heinlein's own fan-favorite characters, and they're swapping partners and just boffing like bunnies. The effect is so ridiculously masturbatory. The Number of the Beast may be the first and only science fiction novel you should only read while wearing latex gloves and a condom. All right, there you have it. That's all I've got for this episode of SFF 180. Remember the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me. And yet, if you enjoyed watching, please hit that like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe. That is how the channel grows. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army sometimes get little perks like early access to some of my videos, if I get them edited and finished early enough. I want to thank all of those people for their additional support. It's wonderfully appreciated because I use the Patreon money to pay my channel artist, Matt Olson. Very gifted artist, the fellow who does all of these great thumbnails and animations and stuff for me. So it's very much appreciated. Thank you. I want to thank all the rest of you guys for being the very best viewers in all of BookTube. I hope that those of you who are celebrating Thanksgiving today have a wonderful day. You're not getting into too many nasty political arguments over the dinner table, that you're enjoying overeating. Just indulge. That's what it's for. All right, but please be safe. Please be healthy. And until I see you next time, happy reading.